why nobody can kill a 90s Japanese engine, and why that scares modern automakers. A mechanic in Karachi bought a junkyard Toyota pickup for parts. He wasn't planning to drive it, just strip it down and sell the pieces. But out of curiosity, he threw a battery in, primed the fuel line, and turned the key. The 22R engine, sitting untouched for 4 years under a tarp, fired up on the second crank like it had been running yesterday. No smoke, no knock, no drama. He ended up driving that truck for another 6 years before he finally sold it, still on the same engine. That's not a fluke story. That's basically the entire personality of 1990s Japanese engines in one anecdote. So let's dig into why these things refuse to die, and why the industry quietly stopped trying to build them this way. The mindset nobody wants to admit anymore. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Durability like this isn't magic, and it isn't luck. It's a choice. And it's a choice that costs money without showing up on a spec sheet, which is exactly why it got phased out. You can't put "this engine will still run in 2045 on a brochure next to a horsepower number, so eventually accountants win that argument. But in the 90s, Japanese manufacturers were still operating on a different scoreboard, one measured in decades, not quarterly earnings calls. Case File 1, the Mitsubishi 4G63. Forget the WRX crowd for a second. Before it became a tuner icon, the 4G63 was doing unglamorous work in Mitsubishi Galants, Eclipses, and Delica vans across Asia and the Middle East. What made it a legend wasn't peak output. It was the iron block wrapped around a bottom end that laughed at abuse. Fleet operators in places with brutal heat and terrible fuel quality kept running these things well past 300,000 miles on nothing but oil changes and stubbornness. Import yards still pull these motors out of wrecked cars today because buyers know the block will outlive whatever body panel it's currently sitting in. Case File 2. The Nissan RB Series 6 cylinders, Nissan's RB20 and RB25 straight sixes get remembered for turbo tuning culture. But the boring version of the story is more impressive. These were daily driver, taxi, and fleet engines across Japan and Australia, regularly clearing 500,000 kilometers with nothing more than routine timing belt swaps and coolant flushes. Taxi companies don't care about nostalgia. They care about cost per kilometer. And for years, RB-powered fleets kept winning that math against everything else on the market. Case File 3. The diesel trucks nobody talks about. Everyone loves talking about Lexus V8s and Skyline 6s. But the real marathon runners of this era were the diesel workhorses, engines like Toyota's 1HZ and Isuzu's 4BD1. These weren't built for enthusiasts. They were built for aid organizations, mining operations, and military logistics in places with zero tolerance for breakdowns. Land cruisers running 1HZ diesels are still hauling cargo across African trade routes today, some with well over 600,000 miles, and nothing more invasive than injector service. When your engine choice gets picked by the UN for use in war zones, that's a durability endorsement no marketing department could buy. Case File 4. The Subaru Flat 4 that just wouldn't listen, Subaru's EJ22. The naturally aspirated Flat 4 that powered legacies and Imprezas through the 90s doesn't get half the internet fame of its turbocharged cousins, and that's exactly the point. While the turbo variants earned a reputation for head gasket drama under boost, the plain old EJ22 quietly became one of the most bulletproof engines Subaru ever made. Owners in cold climate states routinely reported crossing 300,000 miles with nothing more than timing belts, oil changes, and the occasional gasket swap. No turbo heat cycling, no exotic tuning, just a Flat 4 grinding through winters and never asking for much in return. Rally teams even use detuned versions of this platform for endurance events, specifically because it could take a beating on rough terrain and keep firing lap after lap. So what's actually going on under the valve cover? Strip away the individual engine stories and a pattern shows up every time. These engines were built with margin. Not just enough to pass warranty, but genuine headroom between what the engine could survive and what it was ever asked to do in daily life. Metallurgy played a huge part. Where cheaper alternatives existed, Japanese engineers frequently reached for tougher materials anyway. Forged internals in engines that never needed to be forged. Iron-in blocks that could have gone aluminum, oversized bearing surfaces that never came close to their real limits. None of it showed up as a bullet point buyers noticed at the dealership. It just quietly meant the engine had somewhere to go when neglect, bad fuel, or a missed oil change eventually happened, because in the real world, it always does. Thermal management is the other half of the equation. Overheating is the single fastest way to kill an engine, and 90s Japanese cooling systems were frequently oversized relative to actual demand. Radiators bigger than necessary, oil coolers as standard equipment rather than upsells, and simple mechanical water pumps that didn't rely on fragile electronics to keep coolant moving. Fewer failure points meant fewer chances for a hot day in traffic to turn into a blown head gasket. And then there's the boring stuff that nobody puts in a highlight reel. Tolerances. Machining an engine block to tighter, more consistent tolerances costs real money in tooling and quality control, and it doesn't show up as a feature you can point to on a test drive. But tighter tolerances mean components wear more evenly over time, instead of developing the uneven, accelerating wear patterns that eventually turn into knocks, blow-by, and oil consumption. A block machined a few microns more precisely in 1993 might not feel any different on day one, but it's the difference between an engine that gradually loosens up gracefully over 400,000 miles and one that starts eating oil at 120,000. The export afterlife nobody plans for. Here's a detail that rarely makes it into these conversations. A massive number of these engines are still running today, not because their original owners kept them forever, but because of secondhand global markets. Vehicles retired early in Japan for reasons that have nothing to do with mechanical condition, inspection costs, changing regulations, buyer preference for newer models, get exported wholesale to markets in Africa, Central Asia, and the Caribbean. Mechanics in those regions have spent decades essentially running an unplanned global stress test. And the results keep confirming the same thing. These engines were massively understressed relative to their actual capability, which is why they keep going strong in climates and conditions the original engineers probably never even pictured. Talk to any independent mechanic who specializes in imports, and they'll tell you the same story with slightly different details. Engines showing up with 5-figure mileage on the original clock, service histories that are basically a shrug, and fuel quality that would make a modern ECU throw a dozen codes. And yet, they fire right up and keep working. That's not because these particular cars got lucky. It's because the baseline engineering margin was so generous that even years of mediocre maintenance couldn't fully cash it out. In a weird way, the neglect these engines survived became the real-world proof of concept nobody in a lab could have manufactured on purpose. The part where modern engineering pushed back, none of this means modern engines are bad. That's an oversimplified take. Today's engines are dramatically cleaner, more efficient, and produce power numbers that would have seemed impossible in 1995. But efficiency targets and emissions regulations came with trade-offs. Tighter tolerances, more sensors, turbochargers running higher boost as standard rather than exception, and components engineered to a calculated service life rather than run until something else on the car fails first. That's not incompetence, it's a completely different design brief, driven by regulations and expectations that simply didn't exist 30 years ago. Why this story keeps resurfacing every few years, this topic goes viral again. Some guy posts a video of a 300,000-mile Land Cruiser, or a taxi fleet 4G63 that refuses to quit, and the internet loses its mind all over again. It's not nostalgia for its own sake. It's a genuine engineering mystery hiding in plain sight. An entire era where manufacturers had the budget, the patience, and the institutional will to build machines that outlasted their intended lifespan by a factor of 2 or 3, and largely walked away from that approach once the economics stopped rewarding it. So next time you see a beat-up 90s Japanese pickup or sedan still rolling down the road with the original engine untouched, know that you're not looking at luck. You're looking at a decade-long argument between engineers and accountants, and for one brief window in automotive history, the engineers won. It's worth sitting with that for a second, because it flips the usual story on its head. We tend to assume progress is a straight line. Newer always means better built. But durability, it turns out, was never really a technology problem. It was a priorities problem. Somewhere along the way, the industry decided that lasts forever wasn't worth chasing anymore, not because engineers forgot how to build that way, but because nobody was writing the checks for it. And that's the real legacy of these engines. Proof that the ceiling was always higher than the market ever demanded.